Good morning, everybody, and welcome once again to the World Economic Forum. My name is Hadley Gamble. I'm the Senior International Correspondent and Anchor for CNBC. I'm based in the Middle East. This is my 10th Davos, I think. So panelists, welcome. It's all great to have everybody, finally, after 2 years, coming back to this forum. We're happy to be here, and I'm really excited to be speaking about this topic. It's something that we cover actually quite a bit in the Middle East. Essentially what we're going to be talking about is the generation of progress that's been lost and how we're going to achieve gender parity at a time when the numbers are looking pretty dire. We're now talking not just 100 years, we're now talking 136 years is the estimate of us getting there. Before we kick it off, though, I'd love to ask the audience a question. Obviously, corporations, governments, people have various opinions about what's happening right now in the United States. But I'd love to get a show of hands and just a feeling from the room about how concerned we should be about the conversation right now surrounding Roe v. Wade. Do you believe, audience, that this is a fundamental question of our time for women? And if this decision is made to roll back Roe v. Wade, that this actually sets the women's agenda back? Show of hands? That's pretty much everybody, I think, yeah. So I think to sort of kick us, all of you, and I know it's a difficult thing to put you guys on the spot, I understand that. Coming from a corporation myself, I'm not allowed to have an opinion, not just because I'm a journalist, but I'm technically not allowed to have one, so I understand that there are difficulties involved here, and it's incredibly sensitive, but I think that we can't have a real conversation about gender parity and about women's roles in the world without talking about what's happening in the United States right now. But just to kick things off, I'd love to introduce our panelists. I'm very excited to be here, as I said. Gabriela Boucher, she's the Executive Director of Oxfam International. It's wonderful to have you. I'd like to introduce Jonas Prissing. He's the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Manpower Group. We're also joined by Stephanie Troutman, the Chief Growth Officer of WePro, and of course, Stephen MacMillan, Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer at Hologic. It's great to have you both on this panel. I want to ask you guys to walk me through where you see we are today. Gabriela, I'll kick off with you.
Thank you. So for me, it's the first time at Davos. And so yesterday I bumped into 3 amazing women, young women, who are climate activists. And for me, they represent the hope and in fact, women who are taking on the biggest challenges of our time. So Hindu Ibrahim, who is from Chad, Liz Watuti, who is from Kenya, and I also saw Vanessa Nakote from Uganda. And they joined Greta, Malala, so many other young women who are actually taking on these big problems of the world, and they give us hope because that's where the leadership is coming from. And they also make me think of all this setback. What does it mean about all the others who are not going to make it in the way they have made it? And all the young girls who are not getting education at the moment, and unfortunately the pandemic, we estimate that around 20 million girls will not get back to education because of the pandemic. And it took decades, as we all know, and a lot of investment and huge efforts everywhere and changing social norms to get so many girls into education. And now this is going back. So it's a problem, a huge tragedy for the girls now, but also for the future. And you may talk about the workforce later, but what does that mean in many countries around the world? The other thing that happened in the pandemic is a shadow pandemic that is less visible, is a pandemic of gender-based violence, domestic violence that happened across the world in the homes. And according to UN Women, up to 1 in 2 women experienced gender-based violence during the pandemic. So this is the level of, it's a pandemic of violence that has also had enormous impacts on the lives of women and girls across the world. You mentioned the 136 years to reach gender parity. It would take 267.6 years to reach gender parity in the economic area, so of participation and opportunity. So we're really far there. Unpaid care work was estimated even before the pandemic at 12.5 billion hours each day by Oxfam. And that, the data of the pandemic just suggests that it has gone up, and we'll need to count this and also understand what the implications have been in terms of women's decisions or families' decisions in terms of working outside the home or not, and what it means for the long term, probably lots of societal changes. And there's still 178 countries that maintain legal barriers that prevent full participation of women in the economy. And you said the issue of sexual and reproductive rights and bodily autonomy in the US, but maybe the other side is in Latin America. There's been swings to on the other side, in Argentina, in Colombia. So there is also a big debate, in fact, on women's bodies and who decides. So that's going in opposite directions in many parts of the world. So that's a bit what's happening, and you know, of course, the pandemic in many respects affected women more than men. We know from the data more women lost their jobs because they were more represented in sectors that like hospitality, that were badly affected during the pandemic. Many will not return to work. Maybe in some countries that can be a choice. In many countries that means falling into poverty and being heads of households who need to find alternatives for their families, now compounded by the enormous inflation problems, crisis that is being felt everywhere, and of course hunger, which is at record levels at the moment at 193 million people. And as we know, women and girls eat less and last when there's a crisis like this, so that means it's impacting women and girls disproportionately now. So we want to say we're going out of a pandemic period, but in reality the pandemic continues in many countries because there's huge vaccine inequality, and that's been another driver for some of the setbacks, but also the conflict in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, and the crisis, the cost of living crisis, have meant many women are really under huge pressure, and it's more of a challenge for survival at the moment.
Jonas and Stephanie, I want to bring you in to kind of work us through some of the solutions potentially that we see. And we're talking about not just the workplace solutions, but the broader technology solutions as well.
So overall, you know, women are underrepresented in the workforce globally, and I think the pandemic gave us an opportunity, a glimpse into the future, what it looks like when demographically not everyone can participate. And you know, as we think about the evolution of labor markets, and we think about this from a historical perspective, big events, disruptive events like these, within the right conditions of having to change, actually accelerated a positive change within a very negative event, of course, such as the pandemic. So what we have seen clearly is exactly, you know, women being participating less in various sectors because they're overrepresented in some sectors. On the positive side, though, what many organizations have realized that in-person presence in the workplace does not equate productivity or contributions to the organizations. So we believe that the lasting legacy of the pandemic is going to be greater flexibility, which we think will enable women to participate easier in the absence of the support structures that you're referring to in terms of childcare, especially, so that we may see an opportunity to come back. Equally, essential workers have realized and starting to realize they're essential. And in a skills-short labor market, that means their voices are heard louder, and their expectations on what it takes for them to get back become more pronounced and more forceful. So that you're starting to see the effects of wage inflation amongst essential workers who realize they're essential, which is to say, if we don't get paid more, we're not coming back. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, they're getting paid more, and they're starting to come back. So whilst there is no doubt that during the pandemic we saw significant negative effect that disproportionately affected women, structurally, employers are looking for skilled workers. Women are more skilled and more educated than men, yet are 20% underrepresented. So employers will understand that they need to attract female talent into their workforces, and now have ways and experience in terms of how they can work in different ways to accommodate this change. So I am cautiously optimistic, actually, that despite the terrible circumstances under which we've seen this change or these difficulties, that we may see an acceleration of the underlying trend and need for women to participate to a greater degree going forward. And technology, of course, has a lot to do with that.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. I think for women in the workforce who are affected by the pandemic. I think we're looking for creative solutions to bring them back to the workforce. We have programs, but I think it's structural and it's purposeful. At Wipro this year, we've done some very deliberate things to promote the need for more diversity in the organization. My appointment as CGO was the first. I'm the first woman to ever serve on the executive board of Wipro. Since then, we've doubled the number of women in leadership at Wipro over the past 12 months. That was very deliberate on Thierry's part because he believed that diversity creates a better business environment, better solutions, better impact for our clients. And so very purposeful and deliberate in bringing talented, capable women into the organization. And the impact we've seen has been profound, not only in attracting more talent to the company, but also in helping the women who have been there. 36% of our workforce is women, not enough, we need more. But we've also seen a lot of inspiration to the women who have been there for a long time to know that there is an opportunity for them to move up into leadership roles. And personally, I spend time with every woman who reaches out to me, regardless of her level in the organization, to talk to her about her ambitions and her career goals. And so I think we have to be purposeful without necessarily being quota-driven, because I don't think women want that. I think we want to be in leadership positions because we deserve to be in leadership positions. And for a long time, I think we promoted men based on their potential. We promoted women based on their performance. And lo and behold, we had all this untapped potential that was there, that as we started to be more purposeful in promoting women, we unlocked all of this amazing potential that we're now seeing manifest itself in leadership on boards. So I think that's one element. I think the second is we need to be deliberate about training and development, helping women come in and out of the workforce throughout their careers so that they feel like if they want, some women can't stay home, but some women want to stay home for a period of time. And so how do we enable them to do that, keep connected to them, help enhance their skill sets when they come back into the workforce so they don't feel like they're left behind. And the way that technology is changing today, it is so rapid. There are so many opportunities now because you can work remotely. You can sit on the soccer field and watch your daughter play and then be on a conference call. Not ideal, but when I started my career, that wasn't even an option. And so while I think we're making progress, to your point earlier, I think there's still a huge population of women that we don't reach in the same way. And so in childcare, to me, is one of the most fundamental systemic changes that we need to make. Because when you have great childcare, you are very productive and effective at work. And when you don't, it definitely affects your children and your life. And so for the women who have children and want to have both, which I do, and I did, that fundamental need is there. And as a company, we've done a lot to create childcare centers on our campuses, so you can be close to your children while you're at work. And also, we've done a lot around our hybrid work environment to allow women to come back as they're ready. And maybe come back when it's needed, not just because they need to be in the office or they should be in the office. But I do think there's more to do. But we have to be purposeful in addressing these challenges and opportunities, quite frankly.
Stephen, I want to bring you in on this and just ask you to give us a sense of how tough this situation is for women in terms of that underinvestment in healthcare and what that means in the trickle down.
Sure. I was going to pick up on some of the fun stuff that I just made here. But when you think about healthcare, and I think the reason Hologic was invited to join the World Economic Forum is we've been the world leaders in women's health and diagnostics for many years. We invented 3D mammography. We invented the modern day Pap test, HPV testing. We're also one of the world leaders in developing COVID tests when they were needed. So, we've been there for women for a long time. And the biggest thing I think that we had seen as diagnostics, a diagnostics company, I couldn't figure out why everybody talks about women's health, but we're not making the action. And so we finally realized that what gets measured gets acted upon. And so some of you may or may not know, but we invented a couple of years ago, we partnered with Gallup and have developed the first comprehensive global study of women's health around the world. And this is, incredible data, 122 countries worth of data, interviews in all of the countries. And we looked at things, even though we're largely in the women's health space, we looked at much broader metrics, which include preventive health, including emotional wellness and feelings of safety. And as coincidence would have it, we started the study and it was first fielded in the year of 2020. Now, obviously that was as the world went into COVID and lockdown. And in many ways I thought, okay, that'll be good to get that data because hopefully that's a baseline of the worst. Now we're just starting to get the early data for 2021. And unfortunately, I think we're still seeing, obviously tremendous drawbacks in women's health, especially on the safety issues. And I think there's been so many unintended consequences. And part of what's troubled me as a leader, we've had this single-minded focus on number of COVID cases in the world. And we've lost sight of so many of the other issues, particularly facing women. And as we've gone into these lockdowns and we've suddenly just closed our eyes and women are not getting treatments, or frankly, more than 1 billion women last year didn't even see a healthcare professional in the world. And nobody's paying attention to that. We can count the number of COVID cases in every country by day, but we can't count how many women are getting raped, how many women are, coming down with HPV, how many women are being abused at home, right? And there are so many other things that we are missing. And that I want to get back to where we stop this single-minded focus on one metric and start to broaden out. And again, let's think about women's health and let's listen to the women in our societies. And it's not a coincidence that if you look at the actual country rankings in here, the top 15 countries, I'll just read off most of them very quickly. Austria, Finland, Latvia, Norway, Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, Australia, Switzerland, Estonia, UK, Iceland, New Zealand, Sweden. A lot of women leaders, right? If you think about women's health and gender parity, the countries of the world that are being led by women or have been led or have a lot of women in leadership have made a lot of progress on women's health, but they've made a lot of progress on gender in general. And if we think about the real fundamental problems going on in this world today, and frankly, the leadership that is largely male-driven, I can argue, is behind a lot of our problems at the government level today. If we got more women in the gender parity, and they come together, women's health and education and women's safety, they all tie together as we go forth.
Yeah.
So, sorry, sound
Sadly,
like a
we can't all move
soapbox.
to Europe. I would be in for that. Gabriele, though, talk to us a little bit about all the money that's been spent by governments globally post-pandemic, and even throughout the pandemic, supposedly supporting women, but obviously a lot more needs to be done. Talk us through that structural element.
Yeah, so I think most of the panel is speaking primarily of women in the global north. Of course, your studies of women everywhere, but those first countries are all in the global north. And we at Oxfam are talking about the majority of women and how, in reality, unfortunately, inequality grew in all aspects. And of course, it's in economic inequality, gender, race, but we haven't talked also about the diverse gender identities. Our discussion here has been a bit binary, but we obviously talk about non-binary, non-gender conforming people and everything, how to be really inclusive and understand the disproportionate impacts all these different identities have meant for people during the pandemic time. And one thing also that is very important, the majority of women in the developing world, in the global south, are in the informal sector. So when the pandemic hit and there were lockdowns or restrictions, that meant no income at all. And that's been a huge, huge strain, and that's been the pain that we're talking in our report that we launched today, Profiting from Pain. We talk some industries are in fact doing extremely well, and billionaire wealth has risen greatly during the 2 years of the pandemic. But on the other side, women have been left out. So one of the solutions is to think of how to give the same rights to informal workers as the ILO has for formal workers. So how to really, that mostly feminized informal workforce in the global south can have greater security in their everyday lives when shocks like these, which will continue to come, unfortunately, hit them. And one of the ways that that can be funded is really by working on reviewing our taxing system. So taxing wealth, so we are advocating for taxing wealth. So we tax income, but we don't tax wealth. So there's sources of funding that we're not tapping that in small percentages can actually bring enough money to solve many of these issues. So those are our big solutions of changing how the economy is structured at the moment. By and large, those profiting at the top are mostly men, and it's really structured, the whole system, on the shoulders of women in the sense of all this unpaid care work that happens everywhere. So another structural solution is, of course, to invest in care work. So childcare was being mentioned, but there's many aspects of care, so that that burden that is on women's shoulders can really be shared and liberate all the potential that is there. So those are some of the things that we think we should be doing.
We heard earlier cautious optimism about what's happening in the world for women today, but when you speak about it and the more global situation, obviously those numbers are dire and it's very worrying. And really a question to all the panelists. I was speaking to Sheryl Sandberg about this very topic just a month or so ago when we had International Women's Day in Dubai, and I asked her specifically about this, and she said our challenge is really to find a way to remain cautiously optimistic and while at the same time feeling that outrage to drive us forward, and how to balance that as women and as men as well in the workforce. When you think about what companies are doing today to address this challenge in the private sector, she was also saying to me that the workforce participation in the United States alone is now at 1988 levels, which just is rather astonishing. Frankly, to someone of my generation. I'm on the cusp of millennials, by the way. But walk me through what you guys see are the real challenges there, and if the companies themselves are really addressing them. Because as someone who works for a major international corporation, I can tell you every week we get a new email about what we can do to support each other in the workplace, and women and various genders and all of these things. But it all really comes down to your own personal experience. And I have been called aggressive so many times by male managers, and I know for a very, very big fact, if I was working for a financial firm and I was a man, aggressive would have been a compliment. But it wasn't when they said it to me. So take it away, guys. You want to start?
I'll jump in because Hologic has taken a very different approach than most companies, and it's probably a very personal approach from my end. But we don't have a quote-unquote diversity officer or anything else. We have a chief diversity officer, which is me.
Yeah.
And I am remarkably proud that as we sit here today, we have 3 division presidents of our businesses in the United States. 2 of the 3 are women. By the way, the 3rd is a black man. Our CFO is a woman. And as you were talking, Stephanie, earlier, I remember when I was promoting our CFO to her position. I had her out to dinner. It was the night before a business review, and I asked her, I said, so what do you picture in your career? And it was the classic, probably woman response. She was like, I'd love to be a CFO someday, and here's what I'm working on. And, in another few years, I hope I will have done all of these things. And you talked about performance versus potential. And after she went on, I said, well, I was kind of thinking you will make a great CFO. And I was kind of thinking about maybe Hologic tomorrow. And it was one of the most fascinating things. But what we got rid of is the ready now. Because I think it's one of the biggest barriers for women, because we're always quick to give men, the man is ready, we'll take it back. Because by the way, every man thinks they can do the job tomorrow, right? While the woman will be there, and I'm sorry to sound like I'm being, but this is somebody who's developed a ton of women in my career.
Yeah, and the data supports what you're saying.
And it is. It's the aggressive when it's used for a man versus a woman. And it's, I have challenged all of our leaders through the years when they use terms like that in our discussions. But I found by getting rid of the ready now or the ready in 2 to 3 years, because I think we're so much quicker to bet on the man, on potential, even if the performance isn't there. So what we've tried to do within our company and our culture is really drill down and be a merit-based company and take out all of the garbage talk around when, as soon as somebody says aggressive, we try to call it out. Wait, is that, those kinds of stereotypes? And, I'm incredibly proud of what we have. We've got an incredible amount of women, and you spoke also now, we've become magnets for other women, and frankly, we've got a huge, black community of managers in our company because they also are seeing VPs and presidents who are blacks. So, as you have that, I hate to say critical mass, but a sufficient scale of women and black people, coming up through the organization, it's having a very different effect.
I would say two things. One, I've led two of the most diverse teams in the last two companies I've been with, and it wasn't because I was trying to create parity. It was because it was the right thing to do to get the right talent onto my teams, and they were all very, very high-performing teams. So I think that speaks to the value of diversity beyond the numbers, that it really is good business. And I would say, the second thing, too, and as I mentor and coach women in the organization, it's not only, and I've been very fortunate to have some amazing men who advocated for me, Thierry being the latest, but I also think as women, sometimes when we do get that opportunity, we immediately run through all the responsibilities that we have in our lives. How will I actually make this work? Am I really ready for this? Where men would be like, yeah, I'll take it. I'll move my family across the world. Yes. I'll do this. I'll do that. And instead of just saying yes, I will take the job and I will do the job. And I've personally had that experience as I've gotten promoted throughout my career, just panic attacks over, am I ready for this? Oh my gosh, I thought I would have. And then I did the job, 3 months into the job, everyone was like, oh my gosh, you were so much better than he was. And so, so I think as women too, we need to empower each other and ourselves to say yes and to take those challenges, and then to enable other women in the organization to be as bold and to have their voices heard. So I think, I think there's still a lot to do, but as women too, we need to feel like we own this and we can take our power back and exercise it in the workplace or in the world. But I have been working, I'm very fortunate to work for a company. So you talk about corporate initiatives, 66% of the profits of my company go to the Ajim Premji Foundation, who does tremendous work in India to really help not only educate people, but women as well, to help with major healthcare issues. I spent my Mother's Day with a bunch of young mothers in a clinic in one of the poorer parts of India, and it was just amazing the hope and resilience that these women had. And then we spent time with their young children, and again, just the hope and ambitions they had for themselves, and they are the most disenfranchised. And so I think as companies, not only can we give money to help, eradicate some of these issues, but it also gives us purpose as employees, because we know that when we improve our profits, we help the world. It doesn't just help our stockholders. So I think that is also an important part of kind of governance, if you will, or corporate responsibility to make the world a better place. And there's a lot of ways to do that. That happens to be one way that my company does it, but makes me very proud to work there.
When I hear both Stephen and Stephanie talk about, their evolution, both as individuals and organizations, it mirrors really our and my experience as well. From our understanding of labor markets, we know that women need to and are wanted to participate to a greater degree. So as I thought about our own organization, the fact that it's the right thing to do is evident. The business case with data is also clear. Yet we saw as an organization no movement until we decided that it had to be part of a leadership, the chief diversity officer, or the importance of this is like the importance of implementing a China strategy and being held accountable to the China strategy, which means full board visibility, external and internal communication, and then owning it personally. And I've been personally really amazed at when that shift happens, and I decided I was the problem, but also the solution. We've moved to, through 40% of senior leadership representation being female, and now setting targets to 50%. Our delegation here is 50-50 at the World Economic Forum. Our board, we're in the top 5% of the US public company representations in terms of gender. And all of it really came down to accountability. But what I thought was really interesting was when you described your experience on what it's like. And we know men and women act differently. So we don't establish quotas, but we do require diverse panels for positions. And we try to teach our leaders that when a man immediately says, sure, I can do it, what are we waiting for? Let's go. And a woman says, well, I'm not sure. In the minds of a hiring manager, that means really interested, not so interested. We need to get our leaders then to say, tell me why you don't think this is a great fit. And sometimes it's the woman's choice to say, no, for valid reasons, I don't want to do this. But in lots of cases, it's exactly what you describe. It's no, I'm like some trepidations. I have like 3 kids at school. I'm in charge of this mostly because my partner doesn't help me to the degree, etc. And so we then try and delve into that and figure out a solution to make it possible. Because for the most part, there are absolutely solutions where you can, overcome those obstacles and include women. And I think when we've started to think in that way of, conscious inclusion and purposefully driving this as part of a business strategy, just like you, Stephen, we want to be a destination for the highest skill, the best female talent on the planet. Because we think it'll drive great business outcomes for us. And I would just add that, some macro, whenever you read about governments trying to figure out what to do to get women to participate more, there's only one answer: affordable childcare. And any other debate is because the government doesn't want to spend the money. So it's very clear that if you provide broad access to affordable childcare, women can participate in the workforce. It's clear. So all of the other initiatives of encouraging greater fertility because of demographic changes, or doing this or doing that, and it's your national obligation to make sure the population grows so we can have economic growth. None of that matters at all unless you have affordable childcare. If you have affordable childcare, women have more children and participate in the workforce, economic growth goes up, and it all ends really well. And I think, Gabriella, you pointed out a really good, a lot of the discussion is a little bit North Globe, but not Southern Globe. And to give you an idea, when you refer to informal labor markets and informal work, in many parts of the emerging world, 90% of the workforce is in the informal markets.
Right.
And 10% is working for organizations that are represented here. So it's a 90% problem or a 60% problem. In Mexico, very close to the United States, 60% of the workforce is informal and 40% is formal. So it's a huge issue that we're grappling with, and very difficult to solve, frankly.
Yeah. And maybe if I can come in on your previous point also, so it's about women fitting in and getting new roles, but also how the company changes as a result. So it's a systemic change more than saying, it's about, participating in the company as it has been, or in society as it has been structured. We're talking about deep systemic change and removing barriers that may have been more visible in some places, some are more invisible. And we've talked about some of those less visible ones, but there are many, many more that we need to explore and make sure that then companies change to be spaces where you can be your full self with whatever the circumstances that brought you there are, and then be that fully other, in the diversity rather than conforming to a certain expectation. And in society, it's about also renegotiating roles. So we talk about childcare. I agree, it's a great transformative policy for women's participation in the economy, but also it's part of rethinking, what is childcare a women's only task, or is it something that can be definitely shared? And what about male allies, and how are masculinities changing? We talk a lot about women's empowerment, but what is now the new masculinity, and how has it changed with these policies that you have introduced?
Absolutely. And talking about that in terms of the unconscious bias, and when you now have in Europe all of these companies and governments deciding that we're going to have childcare time for men and women, how that opens up opportunities really for women, because you're no longer judged on the idea that why would we promote you, you're going to be gone for 9 months to a year. So that is a huge, that has a huge psychological impact, I think, on the workforce.
I'm optimistic on two fronts, Jonas, just to pick up a little bit on what you said earlier. I think in today's talent wars and in today's desire to have people re-enter to the workforce to meet the demands of business, I think it's a great opportunity for more people to lean in for the interesting roles that they want, for the training that they need, and for right now compensation as well. And so the power at the moment has shifted. We'll see if that continues with inflation and some of the other geopolitical issues that we're facing right now. But the power for now has shifted to the workers. And so it's a great opportunity to ask for what you need, because companies want to provide you that because they need you in the workforce. And so that is kind of is one issue, and we're certainly seeing that in our business. And then again, kind of going back to technology, I think technology, and it's displacing, unfortunately, probably a lot of women who were in certain roles that are now being automated or digitized, but it's also creating an opportunity for them to, not just for them, but for everyone, to reskill and rethink about the jobs of the future. And, we talk a lot about women in technology, and, I've never coded a day in my life, but I'm a senior woman in technology. And so those jobs are going to be different. The way we work is going to be fundamentally different. It is today, and it will change even more over the next 5 to 10 years. And so I think as we look to the future, let's look at what the future of work is, what the jobs will be, and how we create opportunities for not only women, but for everyone to take advantage of this major shift that's happening today.
I know there are a lot of questions in the audience, and Mark, our colleagues have a microphone.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Camilo from Global Shapers Community. You talk a lot about gender equality in your companies, but also President said you are responsible even for like 10% of the whole employment available for like the whole population. So from your perspective, how we can empower gender equality for small and medium business? Because they are offering like the most of the roles for women or for youth and for youth. So I would like to listen from you. Thank you so much.
Who wants to pick that one up, Jonas?
Well, I think, Camilla, you're pointing to, the engine of jobs growth in most economies, and especially in emerging markets, comes from small and medium-sized businesses. But I think that change will have to come through a couple of things. Access to education, equality will be very important, because as you're describing, the evolution is going to be towards a more skilled workforce. So I think enabling and having all women participate in education. When I cited the fact that women are more educated than men, that's true in most places, but certainly not true in many emerging markets where women are still considered to be, the main people carrying all of the burden for childcare and elder care. Now, one of the positive aspects of this could be the evolution of technology, just as Stephanie says, because you can leapfrog a traditional economic evolution around industries, and small becomes big and all of that, by getting much greater scale, quicker, and access if you have the tools that are there. So some of the infrastructure investments from a policymaker as well, making sure Wi-Fi is accessible to the population at large, will enable women to, quicker than they otherwise would have been able to, access and get into the areas that, they can then run their own businesses in new and different ways.
Gabriela.
If I can add briefly, also we need legislative changes in many countries. The small and medium enterprises led by women, there's still lots of barriers that prevent them from taking loans or from owning property. So that needs to change. And when those barriers are removed, there will be also obviously job creation by those SMEs across different countries.
I think we have a couple of questions in the front.
So I have a question on flexibility because I totally agree. I'm Valérie Beaulieu from the ADECO group. I totally agree that we open a trove of opportunity with the pandemic. We completely transformed the workforce in 2 days or in matters of weeks, so a lot of opportunities. And indeed, flexibility is a blessing, but I'm very worried about reinforcing some stereotypes about low-paid part-time job, and we continue to reinforce the gender pay gap. So how do we need to think flexibility in a way that will empower all gender and all diversity and really be inclusive of all the personal circumstances? I would love to hear from the panel.
Valerie, in our company, we have a lot of debate about this. Because on the one hand, as I mentioned, we think greater flexibility and choice could be a great advantage for women. But on the other hand, I worry a lot about that very flexibility putting women further behind. Because if you were to ask my mom, you were to ask my wife, the ability to get into the workforce was to be present and to be there and be part of, the organizational life and have a shot and at the opportunities. And whilst I want to believe that the greater flexibility we can provide is actually going to be positive, unless managed well, it could become a significant disadvantage, essentially rolling back decades of progress.
Yeah, that's right.
Because, the theory is it's all merit-based, to Stephen's point, and then, promotion comes up and somebody has been visible and somebody not, or lesser so. What's the choice? You would like to supersede human, nature in knowing somebody versus not knowing somebody as well as that. But I would bet that human nature will prevail. And, to try and counter that as much as we need to has proven to be very difficult in lots of fields, in lots of issues around bias and unconscious and conscious bias. So I worry a lot about that as well. Now, I think the good news, though, is many of the things we're seeing today are pandemic anomalies. The labor shortage is a pandemic anomaly. People not being back in the workforce is a pandemic anomaly. So many of the things, this has not finished playing out. And this idea that people are going to stay on the sidelines, that they will be forever working remotely, we have to, get the pendulums clear. 5% of the jobs are full remote jobs by their very nature. 17% today are fully on-premise jobs, and I'm talking knowledge workers here. And then the rest in between is all hybrid possibilities. How that in the middle is going to shake out is still, way up there. But I do think as leaders, it's extremely important to keep in mind that what could be a really good thing could be a really bad thing if it's not managed very well in this transition.
We have one more question. Is that okay? No? Alas. All right, they're going to kick us out of our room. Panelists, thank you so much. That was a fantastic discussion. And audience, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.